I've got the title fully in English, and it's good for us to practice and preserve, if not to enhance our English. I do not want to split my mind over and over between talking in Bahasa Indonesia and English during this presentation or training. My focus is on the topic of paraphrasing and writing in the subject of arts and humanities, whose English is a bit complicated compared to other subjects. This presentation might be less useful to the subjects of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mechanics, but if you can get the ideas, then my story might ease your efforts for publishing in STEM journals. This claim is based upon the fact that you have to achieve, for example, a higher IELTS result when you wish to study in overseas in the subject of arts and humanities compared to the one in STEM, for example. I'm not degrading the STEM subjects, but I'm saying that arts and humanities demand more linguistic abilities compared to the STEM. Some of you might be familiar with some paraphrasing websites like Quillbot. Quillbot is highly necessary for making paraphrase in STEM discourses, but it might not be the case in arts and humanities. For instance, I put this direct quotation. It's taken from the late Professor Gerald Allen Cohen of Oxford. He passed away in 2009. This one is taken from his book entitled Self-Ownership, Freedom, and Equality. And this book is my focus when I was doing my thesis at the University of Melbourne. If I put this direct quotation, you can see that this direct quotation is quite complicated. And whenever I put or I copy and paste this direct quotation into Quillbot, then the Quillbot website gave me this one. With respect to the Quillbot website, you can see that the non-premium Quillbot just makes a paraphrase no more than 400 characters in length and not 400 words. Moreover, it confuses me because the Quillbot arbitrarily replaces the word concept with the word definition. In Cohen's discussion of self-ownership, he distinguishes the concept and the thesis of self-ownership. Therefore, Quillbot does not recognize this point as it is not a specific paraphrasing website for philosophy. As a consequence, people in philosophy and perhaps in arts and humanities in general should keep making paraphrasing manually, like my case. I hope this given example can convince you to keep paying attention to what I'm going to present in a moment. Let me talk about paraphrasing. Paraphrasing reflects the way you comprehend and understand what you're indirectly quoting on. In my academic discipline, that is philosophy, people are likely to make paraphrase instead of direct quotations because we, people in philosophy, usually quote directly only for criticizing or attacking some other philosophers. Otherwise, we keep making paraphrase here and there. Briefly speaking, from the given example, I can paraphrase Cohen's claim on self-ownership as following. Here my manual paraphrase. I didn't use Quillbot for showing you this direct quotation. This paraphrase is merely 49 words or 284 characters, while in contrast, the direct quotation takes 72 words or 445 characters. No missing ideas and points in this paraphrase, this manual paraphrase, neither deviation nor ambiguous meanings, and you can clarify or interpret the quotation precisely. You must not paraphrase some books like holy books, slang expressions, or things that might lose its meaning if you paraphrase. Take some keywords, use your own words. For instance, you must be able to retell the story of Malin Kundang, for example, in 3 or 5 sentences, despite the story may take approximately 200 book pages. This is actually paraphrase. You squeeze the story without shifting its narration. In my opinion, there are two levels of paraphrasing, both of which I will discuss in a moment. First, shifting some words by using their synonyms. This level does not change the structure of sentences that we are paraphrasing. Second, if you could not replace some words with their synonyms for some plausible reasons, then you could step into the second level, this changing the structure of sentences or paragraphs. Let me explore both levels in more detail. Uh, the if you use synonyms, for example, they apply only to non-conceptual words in each academic discipline. For instance, I cannot change the word, for example, Aristotelian logic into the traditional logic because they refer to some different qualifications, though some people fallaciously fail to distinguish both of them, even in people in philosophy. The former, I mean the Aristotelian logic, leads to a unified proposition and an axiom. But in contrast, the later, I mean the traditional logic, refers to a set of propositions. Another example is logic and critical thinking, because critical thinking seems like ignoring the idea of analytical thinking. Moreover, I cannot replace the design thinking in management or business studies with the synthetic thinking in critical thinking, though both types of logic might share the same idea to it, mixing some innovative ideas. Um, and then, wait, sorry. Yeah, I, I suggest you to use thesaurus to develop your vocabularies, but please make sure that you get the precise meaning and context of how the audience in your academic areas would perceive your synonyms. For instance, I cannot use the word gestate, Gestate, to shift the verb to conceive, Toconscive. We could replace the word thinking with the word contemplating, but we should also pay attention to the context of the quoted text. Shifting the word, for example, tasawwuf with Islamic mysticism is a debatable here and there. Therefore, you should justify the way you do paraphrasing by composing an additional sentence or putting a footnote or an endnote. Some synonyms do not share the same scope of meanings, tendency, impression, etc. For example, quote, this article aims to investigate, unquote, has a slightly different meaning with, quote, this article aims to inquires, unquote. On on one hand, to investigate is to execute a formal or systematic inquiry. On the other hand, to inquire is to ask information from someone. Thereby, choosing to investigate is much better because it covers the substance of to inquire. Whenever we consider some synonyms, we should make sure that we understand its actual and contextual meanings in English. To do so, I suggest you to constantly check to some dictionaries and thesaurus, but you should also bear in mind that the linguistic authority is not located on those dictionaries nor thesaurus, but the linguistic authority is located on the native speakers. For instance, the expressions, quote, thanks for coming, unquote, and, quote, thanks for your coming, unquote, imply different meanings, and native speakers speak about them in a very different context. Simply because we are not English native speakers, we should check into some dictionaries and thesaurus. Even we should also browse its meaning in order to make sure that we get its precise meaning and context. On uh, restructuring a sentence, some sentences, a paragraph, or some paragraphs might be tricky to some of us. This is what I call as the second level of paraphrasing. You take this option only for some reasons. First of all, there are some keywords whose synonyms could confuse your audience in your particular area of research. As a consequence, you keep the keywords as they are, but you alter the structure of structure of a sentence. For instance, you're going to paraphrase the sentence, philosophy is not a compulsory subject in Indonesian schools. I cannot shift the word philosophy into wisdom because one meaning of philosophy is loving the wisdom. Therefore, I keep the word philosophy, but I change the structure of the sentence into in Indonesian schools, I change the structure. Philosophy is not a mandatory subject. You can see that I modify the sequence of words in that sentence, and I also put the word mandatory as a synonym of compulsory. Second, you wish to shorten a long text, and you wish to show your audience the way you interpret, understand, and comprehend the quoted text. For example, you plan to paraphrase the 4 paragraphs of Indonesian preamble in our constitution, the one which contains our Pancasila. We know that this paragraph is actually one long sentence comprised of a sub-paragraph that is Pancasila. On this occasion, you may change the sequence or shorten its length, but you must not change the 5 principles of Pancasila. One example of how to restructure the paragraph might be in this giveaway you can see in my slide. You can see that I break the long paragraph into 2 short sentences without losing the original composition of 5 principles in Pancasila. You may disagree on this example, and you're free to propose your own paragraph, your own paraphrase. Please remember that you cannot simply translate your writing in Bahasa Indonesia into English. Texts in Bahasa Indonesia are likely to be in passive voice or sentences. However, English readers do not really like this for some reasons. Therefore, you should write in active voice in English. If you insist to write in Bahasa Indonesia for any reason, then please make sure that you write in active voice. Just to recall your memory, this sentence, quote, Qusthan is giving a training on paraphrasing and writing strategy, unquote, is obviously written in an active voice. In contrast, the training of paraphrasing and writing strategy is given by Qusthan. Is clearly in a passive voice. On this occasion, there is no urgent need for me to compose a sentence in a passive voice. Yet, you might be naturally writing in passive voice as a consequence of your writing in Bahasa Indonesia. You may reverse the structure of a sentence or a paragraph, but please make sure that it would not mislead your audience or your readers. If you can be sure, then you should not restructure the text that you're going to paraphrase. A direct quotation is a better option in this particular case. In the context of science, technology, engineering, and mechanics and logic, I surmise that what I mean by I surmise is I make a conjecture, but without a complete observation. I surmise that we should not restructure all formula and theorems because it would confuse the implied symbolic notations in logic. If you have an academic background in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mechanics, then please do not hesitate to correct this particular conjecture. Let me proceed to the writing strategy. Previously, the team proposed to me to give you a strategy, but I'm reluctant to give you a strategy. Instead, I prefer to give you some tips on writing. First, you should get to know some journals in your area of research or academic discipline. I always be sad whenever I read in our Telegram group that some of us constantly asking about some journals in your own research interests. Nevertheless, you should stop doing this action because you are a researcher and you should find and seek for your own targeted journals. Identify and recognize the recent issues in your research area or in some targeted journals. It does not mean you cannot propose a new topic or we're discussing an old-fashioned topic. I'm just saying that it is more tactical to continue the recent debate or issue in your own areas of research. And then I suggest you to write to the editor-in-chief of your targeted journals. Tell them briefly about your current manuscript, whether or not it would fit with their next issue and concerns. Some journals do commission their articles prior to you submit into their journals. For example, in my academic field, there is a journal, namely Philosophy Compass. I cannot submit my manuscript into them prior to ask about the particular editor in a particular area in philosophy. If they have given their permission, then I can submit my manuscript. And then please do not be lazy for making an outline and or a mind mapping prior to writing or reporting. This is highly necessary for keeping your discussion on the track. You can use, for example, I use a free plan. It's a free software and it works in Linux, Microsoft, and Mac. In contrast, you can also purchase a paid mind mapping software like the Rational. Now your audience, their style of writings and arguments. Who are they? What are their recent publications? Where do they work and teach? Are they open-minded to researchers from our country? I have a bad experience in submitting my manuscript on war or the ethics of war into an Israeli-based journal in philosophy. They just ignore my submission for years. They might be exclusive in the sense of only their academic circle may submit to the journal. You can avoid this potential issue from the authors who have published into the journals. Know the tradition of your targeted journal, the taste of the editor-in-chief, quoting directly or indirectly his or her publications is inevitably a good tactic, and the editorial board as well. Technical requirements are prone to be the way for the editorial board to identify whether you submit a fresh paper or not. For instance, a philosophy journal in Africa requires the potential authors to write, quote, relevant literatures, unquote, as a substitute for, quote, references, unquote, or, quote, bibliography, unquote. Once you fail to notice this particular demand, thus they might be suspicious that you used to submit your manuscript into another journal, or in the worst case, you also submit your article elsewhere in the same period of time. If you have a research assistant, then you should ask his or her hand to deal with various technical prerequisites prior to make another submission. Instead of spending your energy to publish in European, Australian, or American-based journals, I suggest you to find some alternatives in African, Russian, Asian, and Latin American-based journals. They are likely to be more open-minded to us Indonesians or Indonesian academics. To do this task is to open the links. There is a particular link in simagojr.com, and it provides a way for you to have a look into the journal rank. Thus, you should determine the I forgot to put the link into this slide. Sorry. This you should determine the subject areas, its categories, and its regions or countries. Having said that, you should check the website of each journal. Please study each journal thoroughly prior to make a submission. If you wonder about the link, you can open simagojr.com and then find the journal rank, and then you can find the rank in some particular areas like Africa, Pacific, Northern America, and so on and so forth. Let me proceed to the paper quality. We know some objective general qualities of what a good paper looks like. Some qualifications like novelties, innovation, breakthrough, and others are inevitable. At this level, please allow me to add some additional qualities that might be useful for you. First, a good paper is the one that is against the cliche. I'm not telling you to ignite any revolution of science, but simply striving to challenge the conventions and traditions in your own academic area. This is not an easy task, and it might harm your academic reputation. For instance, you work on a manuscript revealing that Socrates was not a historical person. He was merely an imaginary character made by Plato. Or Plato was not a genuine philosopher because there was no sifting in his ideas, just as most philosophers do. And then do not spend too much energy on grammars, but your analysis. To the extent of my knowledge, you might only need to deploy approximately 4 out of 16 tenses. Please bear in mind that publishing your article is not a matter of exhibiting your grammar abilities, but but you report the research you have done recently. Use some words like would, WOULD, instead of will, especially if you make a prediction, because will is suitable only for the subject I and God, for example. Then avoid fallacies. There are so many types of fallacies. Please pay attention to some of them. One easy way to write analytically and critically is by avoiding false beliefs. For instance, you develop a claim saying that President Sukarno and President Abdurrahman Wahid were the best Indonesian president ever. However, you jump into the conclusion because you ignore the fact that both of them broke the Indonesian constitution through the presidential decree on 5th July 1959 and the presidential notice on 23rd July 2001. You should have addressed these points prior to establish your claim that those two presidents are the best Indonesian presidents ever. Having discussed some points on paraphrasing and writing strategy, I think it's time for us to discuss what you might think as either interesting or confusing. That's all, Bapak Ibu. I think we can proceed by discussion. Thanks for paying attention.
Okay, for all the participants, maybe if you have any question, you can raise your hand, and maybe it's okay to speak in Bahasa or in English, as you please.
Fine.
Fine, yeah. Okay, maybe there are any questions? For the raise your hand, you can just click behind the participant. Any question for Mr. Qusthan? Maybe you just can write your question in a chat, and I will write for. Okay, wait. There is someone who raised. Okay, for Mr. Rama, you can unmute your microphone.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, yeah.
I'm unmute myself. So thank you for Mr. Qusthan for delivering your speech. That was very nice. And you know, sometimes somehow in paraphrasing, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of challenging for us. You know, I have an experience when I try to paraphrase the paper, the sentence in the paper. Sometimes I feel that, well, that was the best sentence how they write, but in it's kind of difficult for us to write in style like a native speaker. Even I tried several times, I tried so many times, my sentence just come out, you know, I feel that, oh, it is just a simple sentence. I really want to make a, you know, like kind of a good in lexical resource or good in grammar, but I haven't changed the meaning of the sentence, but you know what it comes out from my writing is, I feel that's, oh no, it's just a simple sentence. How to make the best sentence? So we still need. I still feel that I need the help of the native speaker to make my sentence becomes better, very much better. So how to avoid them? You know, when we want to pay the native speaker to paraphrase our sentence or to edit our manuscript, you know, the cost is very much high. You know, some people may cannot afford the fee, the cost of the editing service in provided by Elsevier or provided by Enago, for example. So do you know how to build our confidence, how to write? Even I tried so many times, but what it comes out to, in my writing style is just a simple sentence. So
May I know your area of research, Pak? Is it in
chemical
arts and
engineering.
chemical engineering? Okay. Thank you, Pak. I've got your points. You talk about the proofreading. First of all, you're on the right track. You're on the right track whenever you do paraphrase by yourselves, and then you give it to an English native speakers for the proofreading activities. We cannot avoid the fact that we are not an English native speakers, and we are presenting our research into their language, into their logic. So we need them. But in my case, I don't do it because even though my subject is philosophy, I don't do it because I do it by reading a lot of text in my particular area and trying to imitate by writing like the way English native speakers write in philosophy. So imitation is the first easy task to write like them, but without without falling into plagiarism. So, for example, I read the text of Gerald Allen Cohen. I cannot I cannot write like him because he perplexes his text, he perplexes his ideas because there is a kind of a lot of traps in philosophy, so that some people would like to not to expose their points in a blatant way, so that they try to give a package into their substance and essence of text by perplexing their texts. In chemical engineering, I've never been reading text in your particular area, Pak, but perhaps
it's pretty quite straightforward actually. When I read
yes,
the
yes.
paper, it's pretty straightforward. But you know, it sometimes imitating the sentence itself. I never imitated the sentence itself, but I tried to change the meaning. Maybe just a simple way that I've done is just change the structure of a sentence itself. For example, from active to passive, or yeah, I read and then I try to write it with my understanding, with my own understanding. But the problem is, you know, maybe the word selection or my lexical resource is not really so much. So I think, yeah,
Okay.
I'm still struggling about that.
What I meant by imitation is for getting into that level of writing style. If you want to develop your vocabs, for example, my suggestion is read English novels, but it is painstaking to read English novels. You might have to open dictionaries over and over for every sentence that you read. But even though it's painstaking, it can develop your vocabs. In your area, I think you can use thesaurus as well, like I've said, and you can change the structure of the sentence. But I'm not pretty sure about the sentence in, like in physics, for example. If we change the sentence in a particular physics theorem, it would be different in its meanings and implications. But in your area, I'm not pretty sure about the consequences of changing the structure of the sentence from active voices into passive voices. Perhaps you can utilize synonyms, but I believe in your you have to be aware with some conceptual and technical words that you cannot change. That's my suggestion, Pak. Please read novels if you want to develop the your vocabs, and read Jakarta Post, for example. You can get the sense of how Indonesians journalists try to present their news reports into the English audience, and it's quite
Yeah, thank you for your suggestion. Maybe I start reading BBC from now on.
BBC, I don't read BBC, but I prefer Sky News instead of BBC, or the Guardian instead of BBC.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak. Thank you, Pak Rama.
Thank you, Pak Rama. Okay, there is a question from Mr. Ahmad Abrar. Practically, how to avoid plagiarism in quotation in paragraph?
Oh yeah, if you want to avoid plagiarism, you should utilize, or you should use plagiarism checking website like turnitin.com, for example, is pretty useful. In my case, I always give the limitation to my student in a particular um, uh, private university in Jakarta, that you should make sure that your similarity is below 15% or 20%. Uh, or if you cannot use Turnitin, you can copy and paste your paraphrase into Google. Google is quite helpful in some universities, in which case do not pay some amount of money to give me the turnitin.com access. I use Google to check whether or not my students apply paraphrase well. So some students keep forgetting, or they keep ignoring my suggestions to do paraphrase, even though I have been explaining how to do paraphrase to them. But they're too lazy, or they forgot about it. They just copy and paste without putting some body notes. And secondly, you might want to know that if you do paraphrase but you forgot to give the body notes, turnitin.com might detect it as a similarity or potential plagiarism. So you should make sure that you put the body notes or footnotes whenever you have accomplished your paraphrase in a particular paragraph or sub paragraphs. And that's my answer, Pak Ahmad.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Qusthan. But there is so many participants would like to ask. You give an example, maybe you can take a paragraph from a journal, then try to paraphrasing, for example.
Yeah.
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 If you
Yeah. The easiest way to get how to do paraphrase is that, like, some stories from your schools about maling kundang, or any kind of stories, any kind of folk stories. You can tell the story to your friends, or your kids, your daughters, your boys at home, without checking into the books, or without going through the whole papers in that particular book. So paraphrase is squeezing the text, and then you tell the story by using your own words without losing the particular substance and essence. That's the challenge, without changing the substance or the essence of the text. In arts and humanities, there are so many obstacles. Sometimes if I put this word, it might imply some different meanings to my audience. And in philosophy, we choose words in a very, very delicate way to make sure that our audience can get the meaning. But in your area of research, that might be different. You might need to be blatant, or get to the point without perplexing your text or your writings, like the way some people do in philosophy, for example. Should we allow the Bapak Ibu? I think instead of writing, perhaps you can. I cannot trace your questions from above. You can just speak directly to me if you have some questions that I might miss to cover. Question from Pak Jimmy. Yeah, I think you can have the slides. I have given my consents to the team to share the slides with you, and I put some notes into each slides, and the notes is actually is actually my text that I did read to you earlier. Um, From Pak Wayan, that's a good question, Pak. How do you know that you have paraphrased correctly without altering the meaning? That's, I think, the necessity of sharing your manuscript into your academic circles, Pak, so that you can do some kind of uh, you can check whether or not you have been applying paraphrasing correctly. So you can share your manuscript into your academic fellows or your academic circles here and there, so that they can give substantial comments and technical comments as well. That's what we call as peer reviewing processes. You can do peer reviewing processes prior to submit your manuscript into an academic journal, or you can present your papers into monthly seminars or fortnight seminars in your campus or your universities. Um, Question from Pak Ahmad: how to avoid plagiarism in quotation in a paragraph? Uh, that's the function of paraphrase, Pak. Please have a look into the slides, but I can tell you in short that you have to do paraphrase. Paraphrase is basically an indirect quotation as opposed to direct quotation. So we do paraphrase without giving quote and quote marks. We retell the story of our text of other texts by using our own words without deviating the meanings and implications of our paraphrase. And sometimes we can squeeze the original text as well, from 100 pages or from few pages into one paragraph, and so on and so forth. That's the function of paraphrase, Pak. I don't get the question from Pak Edi Suwantoko regarding the receipt for novice writers. Perhaps you should write in a more precise way, Pak.
Maybe the question from Mr. Rignata about how we make a paraphrase from a law, UUD.
From the Constitution, you mean, book?
Yes, yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Let me show to you. All of us have been familiar with the Indonesian Constitution. Let me show you how I do paraphrase into the 4th paragraphs of our Constitution. Wait. Where is it? This one. Yeah. A moment, please. All of us have been familiar with the 4th alinea of our preamble, and then I do the paraphrase in this way. You can see that I can shorten the 4th alinea, the 4th paragraph of our Indonesian preamble, and you can compare. I do not lose the 5 principles of Pancasila, and I keep mentioning the main tasks or the main aims of the Indonesian government to educate the life of the nation, to advance the public welfare, and so on and so forth. That's how I do the paraphrase. Thanks, Book, for suggesting me. I saw there is a question asking for an example of how to do paraphrase in STEM. To be honest, uh, I have been working as an editor, including for LIPI, Bapak Ibu. But in LIPI, in the last few years, in LIPI, I work an editor, as an extra, well, as an outside editor, and I help some researchers in LIPI in PSDR, Pengembangan Sumber Daya Regional. I've never been doing editing in STEM journals, so sorry Bapak Ibu, I cannot give you an example of STEM paraphrase. But if you would like to show me some paragraphs that might be complicated in STEM area, I can help you how to do paraphrase. Let me repeat. The first example is that you change some non-conceptual words or some non-technical words into their synonyms. Secondly, you change the structure of the quoted text. But please do not employ too many passive voices whenever you do paraphrase. We as Indonesians unconsciously write mostly in passive voice with some reasons. Some of us might think that writing in a passive voice is more polite. It's not really true in English academic writings. Uh, in English academic writings, people write in a passive voice if they don't have any other choices. So mostly they do active voice. And English academic audience expect you to employ the first subject I or we. Instead of in Bahasa Indonesia, we are obliged to write in according to the researcher. Who is the researcher? The researcher is me, myself. That's pretty much peculiar in English academic settings. Questions concerning software, I told earlier that you can use Quillbot, but I have shown to you that Quillbot is not really helpful for some academic subjects like arts and humanities, especially philosophy. But if you do STEM, for example, Quillbot might be necessary for you. Let me show you, Bapak Ibu, the previous slides concerning Quillbot. On the second slide of mine, you can see this is a direct quotation from a book in the area of political philosophy. Concept of self-ownership is not identical with the thesis of self-ownership. The latter might be false, blah, 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 blah. If you put this text into Quillbot, you will get this one. And to me, as a student in philosophy, whenever I was studying in University of Melbourne, that's quite confusing to get this result from Quillbot. As a consequence, I do the paraphrase manually, and I can show you this one. There is a distinction between the concept and the thesis of self-ownership, and my thesis was about self-ownership. This distinction is necessary and wise due to Cohen's polemical experience on the issue. On the one hand, the concept is coherent and consistent. On the other hand, the thesis could be either true or false. So that's how I interpret this complicated text from the late J.A. Cohen. And I did not use this result given from Quillbot. You can get these slides later from the team, Bapak Ibu.
Okay, for all the participants, I've already unmuted for all of you. Maybe if you have any question, you just can unmute your microphone. Maybe from Bu Nani Sobika, you can have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good
Waalaikumsalam.
evening, sir.
Good evening, Bu.
Thank you, Miss Didi. Hello, me, sir. I'm Nani Sadika from Yayan Pontianak, West Kalimantan, Indonesia. I have a question for Mr. Qusthan. In academic writing, especially in journals, sometimes we must consider well about idioms, sir. Idioms that we used in our sentence writing. How can we, my question is, how can we manage the idioms well in paraphrase in our journal writing? Thank you, sir.
Can I get clarification? Is it English idioms or Indonesian idioms, Bu?
Both of them. When we writing in international journal, I think that we must consider about idioms internationally, sir. And then maybe there is a specific terms that we cannot use Indonesian idioms in international journals writing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bu. First, please do not call me sir because the Queen of England never gives me such honorable title. So just call me Qusthan, Bu.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a joke actually. Idioms, yeah, idioms is quite tricky, Bu. In the case of English idioms, I avoid to use English idioms because sometimes I'm not sure that the context of what I'm trying to achieve by writing that idiom would be achieved. But in contrast, in the context of Indonesian idioms, I do not translate it into English. I just put it in Bahasa Indonesia or in its original composition. But then I give a footnotes or some explanations that this particular Indonesian idiom means blah 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 blah, so that the non-Indonesian audience would get the sense of what or of what these idioms are trying to imply or trying to achieve. Uh, I don't think that it is compulsory for writers like us, except you do research in literature or in that particular area. But if you research idioms, if idioms are one of your research interests, I think like I said earlier, you don't need to translate Indonesian idioms, but um, you can you can browse some local idioms in Indonesia, and some native speakers or some expatriates also help us to give uh, how to put these local idioms into the English audience, for example. Is that replying your queries? I'm
Mhm.
not pretty sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay, can
Thank you.
okay, thank you, Bu. There is an interesting question from Pak Muizzuddin. Do we have to standardize local terms or phrases from Indonesian to English when we paraphrase? If what you mean by local terms is local idioms, I don't think that we should standardize in the context of translating it into the English composition. Uh, for example, Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Melayu have contributed approximately 3 words into English. First, amok. Amok is English does absorb amok from Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Indonesia. Secondly is kampung. English absorbs kampung into compound, like military compound. Uh, One of my former Canadian English teacher told me about compound. It was taken from Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Melayu. And the third one, I can't remember, but the more we do not, because languages have different linguistic and contextual meanings. Like for example, in Java, in philosophy, there is a philosopher namely Zaki Derrida. Uh, he loved to use the other, for example. whenever people in philosophy write about the other in bahasa Indonesia, they use the Japanese word lian to translate the other. In that particular case, I think it's quite precise, but it doesn't mean that we have to translate all words into English and otherwise. Questions from Rignata. I don't think that we have to translate. Well, in law, if you study law, they have a lot of translations for legal words in bahasa Indonesia. You should check them. You can browse about them, or you can read some media like Jakarta Post. They also translate some local like peraturan pemerintah pengganti undang-undang, for example. I can remember that they translated into the government regulation in lieu of blah 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 blah. So I get the translation from by reading Jakarta Post, for example. Well, paraphrasing is a matter of practice. The more you practice paraphrase, the more you have the experience, the talent, and the knowledge about how to do paraphrase well. And then you can show you the results of your paraphrase to your peers or to your academic circle, so that you can check and recheck whether or not your paraphrase is quite accurate or not accurate.
Okay, maybe for Mr. Miguel, you can unmute and ask your question to Mr. Qusthan. Mr. Miguel.
Ya.
Ya.
Kedengeran?
Ya, kedengeran.
Oke, maaf. Good evening, Mr. Qusthan.
Good evening, Pak Miguel.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about how to deal with the writer's block when we need to use paraphrase. Because for me, sometimes I got revision from my advisor that there are some redundancy in my paper. Yeah, it makes me confused because that part of redundancy was part of my paraphrase of the original sentences that was a key point in my theory. So how to deal with that? Because sometimes if we, especially me, I tend to do some redundancy when paraphrasing from the original sentence. Thank you.
Thank you, but that's a good question. If I have the writer blocks, I don't force myself to keep writing. I do something else. Perhaps I do reading, or I do something else. In my case, I don't force myself to keep writing whenever I suffer from writer blocks. For the second question concerning redundancy, I think this is the way I do. There is a sense of difference between writing in laptop, rechecking our writings in laptop or computer, and checking our writings in papers. I've been working as an editor since 2006, 2008, and it has been giving me the impression that checking, rechecking, editing on papers are different with do it in laptop. I think you can increase your level of accuracy to avoid redundancy by printing your manuscript or your working in progress into papers. And I suspect that you can avoid redundancy by printing your manuscripts. That's a matter of precision, Pak, in the case of redundancy. Third, if your supervisors are English native speakers, I think we should follow his or her taste or his or her preference, because they are the native speakers and we are presenting our ideas in their languages. But if they're not English native speakers, I think well, the claim concerning redundancy might not be correct if your supervisors are not English native speakers. That's my response, but I'm not telling you to fight against your supervisors. I'm just telling that there's a sense of difference between uh, English native readers and non-English native readers. In my case, I had a debate against my English native speaker supervisor. He was complaining whenever I used the word gestate to change the word to think or to conceive, even though some thesaurus gave me the information that gestate means not only having a baby but also thinking uh, in your minds, for example. But that's the sense that we cannot get because we are not English native speakers. That's why I told you earlier you should be aware about the your own supervisors. That's my answers, Pak. Is it addressing your answers, Pak? Your questions, Pak?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Miguel.
Maybe for Mr. Eddie Gunawan, you can unmute your microphone. You raise your hand, right? Yes. Mr. Eddie?
May I ask question?
Yes, you may.
Yes, Bu.
Thank you so much. I'm Caroline from Universitas Advent Indonesia, Bandung. Thank you, Mr. Qusthan, for the good information that you have shared with us. Now, I would like to ask, could you please give us a tips of how could we reduce to 15% similarity? Because just now that you said that you are doing that to your students to have less than 15% of similarity. So could you please show us how to do that? And just now also you said that you are checking that through Google's, the similarity. Can you show us how? Are we going to copy paste that in the Google or do you have any link to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Bu. That's an interesting question. In the case of my students at a particular private international university in Senayan, Jakarta, they have been enjoying some English preparation provided by the campus. Uh, but in that particular case, they still have been struggling uh, to to get a lower score than 15% similarity. Um, well, in that particular case, I suggest them to show me their text, and I can help me why uh, to show me between the original text that they are quoting and their paraphrase, and then I discuss it with them about why you do it in this particular way. You can do it better by blah 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 blah. First, I told them do not change the structure of the sentences. You should prioritize synonyms instead of restructuring the sentences from active voices to passive voices. And then prior to use synonyms, they have to make sure that this particular words has a synonym on that particular words. For example, thinking. thinking and reflecting. Are those words synonymous one another? I don't think so. But thinking and conceiving, I think it's synonymous one another. But it might be different in scopes. Your questions about Google, yes, I do. Whenever I work in other universities which do not use Turnitin, I just copy and paste some sentences from the works of my students into Google. But I put some limitations. I just copy one or two sentences into Google's, and then I jump into other paragraphs. But I just copy and paste sentences which sound different. It doesn't sound to me like that particular students. We can get that particular sense whenever we do interaction with our students on a weekly basis, for example, if you work in a university book. Yes, I do copy and paste to Google, and I do not employ some particular links and resources in Google. Is that replaying your queries, Bu Caroline?
Uh, may I clarify it, Pak
Yes,
Qusthan?
please, please.
Okay. Because I found it's quite difficult for me to get it 15%. I go as far as only like 30%, 25. So you explained just now that I can have maintain the structure of that sentence by just substituting it with the synonyms, and that
Yeah,
should
but
help me go down to 15%.
yes, but it doesn't have to be always in that particular tips. You can also, whenever you read the primary source that you're quoting on, you can close the text and then you try to write without seeing the text. Uh, that's also proper, book. Uh, because if we see the text, sometimes we are seduced, quote unquote, by the text because we keep seeing the text, and it limits our freedom to paraphrase the text. Sometimes you might need to close the text and then you write to paraphrase without seeing the text.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pak.
Thank you, Bu. I hope it's useful for you and helpful.
Yeah, I will try that.
Good luck, Bu.
Okay, maybe we still have 10 minutes for discussion session. Maybe there are any questions?
The easiest way to do paraphrase, another tips for you is that besides closing the text that you're quoting, is that please do not take paraphrase as a difficult matter, because actually we do paraphrasing in a daily basis. Whenever you talk with your fellows, with your co-workers, um, or perhaps after this session, and then you tell your friends or your fellows about this paraphrase. Oh, Qusthan said blah blah blah. Actually that's a paraphrase, but an oral paraphrase. We might be struggling to do paraphrase, a written paraphrase, simply because Indonesians prefer to talk instead of write. We Our habits is talking instead of writing. So from now on, I think we should read and write more. Perhaps you can start by writing your journals, your diary. It doesn't have to be emotional like dear diary, blah 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 today, but writing a diary is a good practice um, to deal with writing writer blocks, or to exercise your paraphrase ability. let's say 1 hour or 2 hours prior to sleeping, you can write what you have done during the day. That's actually a paraphrase as well, but we paraphrase what we have done today by writing your diary or writing your daily journals. That's another tip that I didn't mention earlier, Bapak Ibu. Any more questions, Bapak Ibu? Questions concerning Quillbot. I told earlier that Quillbot might be useful for you if your academic area is STEM. But in my case, in arts and humanities, especially philosophy, and I've given the example in my slide that you're going to get after the session, is that Quillbot is not appropriate to all academic areas. Uh, so that's why I told Pa Didi to, and I proposed to give this particular session to make sure that you can do manual paraphrasing well. If you're not really confident with your English writings, I think that's fine if you write in Bahasa Indonesia, but please make sure that you write in, whenever you write in Bahasa Indonesia, please write in active voice, kalimat aktif Bapak Ibu. I told my fellow researchers in LIPI, please prior to give me your text in English or Bahasa Indonesia, if you write in Bahasa Indonesia, please make sure that you write in in active voices or kalimat aktif Bapak Ibu.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Qusthan. Maybe there are any questions or
Didin saya terakhir deh.
oh okay.
Okay.
Please, Mr.
Yeah.
Rama.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But before I haven't introduced myself, my name is Rama. I'm a lecturer in Brawijaya University. Maybe the last but not least, Mr. Qusthan, maybe do you have something to share about how to improve or how to boost our mood or our skill in writing, academic writing, or maybe you have link that we can learn from it, or yeah, and anything that you can share to us, not only Quillbot. Yeah, and I have used I've been using a Quillbot for several times, but yeah, it helps, but not really help actually. We still need to write with our own language, with our own words. Yeah, I agree with you. Quillbot help, but not help much to us actually. So maybe do you have anything to share, some links or some resource for us to learn or to boost or to enhance our writing skills? Yeah.
Thank you, Pak. That's a challenging questions because uh, to be honest, I've never been searching for that particular links for increasing our paraphrase because from the beginning of my academic career and my professional services as editors in arts and humanities, I believe that people in my area should do paraphrase manually instead of using software like Killbot. But I can give you all of you, Bapak Ibu, a tips. If you don't have sufficient time, or if you don't like to type in your laptop or in your PC, but you want to enhance your paraphrasing abilities, perhaps you should start to record your paraphrase through audio or voice recorder. After you read a particular journal article or a particular book, you might want to paraphrase it orally and then record it into your cell phone or your voice recorders so that you can check and recheck, or you you can enhance your English speaking as well. That is useful as well, I believe. In the case of you don't want to type in your laptop or your PC. So practices make perfect. So there is no other way to enhance your paraphrasing abilities unless you do it on a daily basis. In my case, I read books and journals every day, and then I took some points that might be useful in the future. After I took those paragraphs or those sentences, I try to paraphrase it below the quote text so that I can minimize the length of the sentences or the paragraphs, and then I can absorb and grasp the substances of the quotations that I'm going to use in the future. That's what I can say, Pak Rama. I hope it's useful.
Okay, thank you, Pak Rama.
Thank you so much, sir, for your tips. It's very useful. I will try.
Good luck, Pak.
Okay, maybe the last question from Mrs. Rohmatin Mahila. You can unmute your microphone. Mrs. Rohmatin Mahila.
Yeah, I can read the questions written in the group chat.
Okay.
That's a good question. For your information, my last master degree is in professional and applied ethics. It's actually philosophy, but with a specialization in ethics, both in normative and applied ethics. Your questions concerning the moral values or proverbs, there are some moral concepts that have English translations, but there are some problems, like for example in Bahasa Indonesia or in Indonesian minds, I mean in most Indonesians minds, we we do not really distinguish between ethics and etiquettes, but in English minds they put a bold line separating between ethics and etiquettes. So be careful whenever you translate a particular moral values from, let's say, Japanese cultural settings into an English cultural context. It might be improper, like, for example, Rosso in Japanese philosophy. We cannot translate Rosso into taste in English, for example. I prefer to put Rosso and then give a long explanation about how to transfer the idea of Rosso into English readers, for example. Or in Minangkabau, there is something that we call as raso pareso. It means like Rosso in Java, but with additional substance of checking it empirically. So you can get knowledge from Rosso, but you need to check it into the empirical setting. I do not translate raso pareso into something else in English. I keep the words in the local settings, and then give a long explanation about it. That's my reply, Bu, to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Qusthan. I guess that it's clear
Bu.
for everyone. And
can I address?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I address the question from Pak Jimmy regarding the grammar and or are we running out of time?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. To paraphrase or grammar? Whenever I did the English academic preparation prior to study philosophy in University of Melbourne, one of my teacher told me that do not bother about the grammars. Among 16 grammars, perhaps only 4 or 5 grammars that that is useful for English academic settings. So I think you should prioritize paraphrasing instead of grammar, Pak Jimmy. Uh, I'm afraid that you would confuse your paraphrase whenever you pay attention to the grammar law. So you might notice if you read some books or some journals, they might employ only 2 up to 4 grammars, and you should not change the grammar whenever you do paraphrase. I think you can keep paraphrase by shortening the length of the text that you're going to quote without changing the grammar.
Okay, thank you, Pak Qusthan. Also,
Thank you.
from the whole Pak Qusthan explained, it's very clear. So I do enjoy your explanation. But speaking about paraphrasing, it's about how to reconstruct the sentences from the long term to be shortened. Is that right, Pak Qusthan?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
so speaking about the way we make it short, our writing system is very difficult to be to be shortened, yeah, in several ways. But in the slide, I'm a bit confused why we do not consider about all depend on the grammar. Do not concern the grammar, but the analysis you say that on the slide, yeah, in the previous slide. Okay, so the point after you explain answer my question is about based on your experience in the Australia, your lecturer said that grammar put on the second term, but you must priority the paraphrase. Is that right, Mister?
Yes, to an extent. To an extent, yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
so yeah, for me as an English lecturer, also my student, of course, this is a big challenge for me to how to make sure that to convince the student, oh, this is the paraphrasing. You should not make it in the long term, but you make it shorten so that the reviewer or the advisor will assess your writing to is it qualified or not to be revised and so on. So the point is about we must priority about the paraphrase to produce a good article, a good writing. Okay, thank you, Pak Qusthan, for the analysis. I get the point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Pak. Thank
evening.
you, Pak. Okay, thank you, Pak. Just to make sure to all of you, you can use the example I showed you earlier about self-ownership. You can identify that the grammar is, let me share it to you if we still have some amount of time. This one, this is sample present tense. It's a philosophical claim, and the author did not bother himself with the grammars. It might be different in other academic area, but this is in political philosophy. And then I've I've never been concerning about the grammar. So did the Quillbot, and then this is the way I paraphrase. I do not pay attention to the grammar. I just follow through and trying to understand what the author is trying to argue in his complicated text. So that's what I meant with we do not bother ourselves with the grammar law. And if you read my slides, you can have a look on the below. I put notes. That is actually my text that I have read earlier. So you can get the detailed explanation in the notes section of each slide. to Bu Ina Ventirina, you can get my contact from the team. To Pak Salahuddin Ayubi, I've never been checking those 5 links that you provide, but in my humble opinion, I prefer to do paraphrase manually because my academic area is philosophy or arts and humanities. Like I showed earlier, even Quillbot did not sufficiently paraphrase philosophical text properly without diverging the contextual meanings. You might want to use those 5 links, but you should make sure that the results of the paraphrase is understandable in your academic areas. To do this objectively, you can talk with your peers in your academic circles, and you can evaluate with your fellows in campuses or in schools.
Okay, thank you.
To other questions concerning predatory journal, I'm not talking about predatory journals, and I'm not an expert about identifying predatory journals. So you might want to ask Pak Didi to identify the predatory journals. But I can say that if you're really, really passionate in your own academic areas, I think you should spend more time to do little research to identify which journals that is useful for you and which one is predatory. And you can use websites like Simago, including to identify which journals that might be more welcome to researchers from Indonesia, for example.
Okay, thank you for Mr. Qusthan. I guess we have a limited time, so thank you for your great explanation and great presentation for all the participants. I hope you find my link that I share. So it's for absence and for the slide presentation for Mr. Qusthan, I will send to you by email. So along with the certificate. And before we close our seminar tonight, maybe you can on your video because we have a photo session, if you mind. So please open your video. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I will count 1, 2, 3, and then take the picture. Ready? Yes. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for Mr. Qusthan about your sharing.
Thank you, Pak Bu.
I hope that it can help us to improve our writing skill. And good night for everyone, and see you in the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapak Ibu. Have a nice, lovely, serene night. I hope it's useful, and you can write me by email. I put my email on the last slide. Thank you, Bapak Ibu.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Qusthan.
Thank you, Bapak Ibu.
Thank you, Mr. Qusthan.
Thank you, Mr. Qusthan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Qusthan, and thank you, Ms. Didin.